Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. Today, I'm delighted to talk to Ahmed Paul Keeler. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It's great to have you back. We last met, of course, at Cambridge University when you gave a fantastic talk in front of many Cambridge University students. That was a memorable evening, and you can see that on YouTube on Blogging Theology. So it's great to see you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me again. It's a great honor to be on your channel.
Alhamdulillah, it's a great pleasure to have you, sir. Just to remind people who don't recall, but Paul Keeler was born in 1942 and christened Paul Godfrey. He was brought up in the 1940s and 50s in a conservative, upper-middle-class Anglo-Catholic family. A chance meeting with a master musician from India introduced him to a wonderful new cultural realm. In response, he formulated and organized the World of Islam Festival that took place in London in 1976 and was opened by Her Majesty the Queen, and was the most comprehensive exposition of Islamic culture ever to have taken place in the West. 6 months before the festival opened, Paul embraced Islam. And for many years, he was visiting fellow at the Center of Islamic Studies at the University of Cambridge. Today, Ahmed will tell us about the extraordinary but little known story of Lord Montagu's memorandum, as it's known, how a key Jewish figure in the British government warned the world about Zionism and accurately foretold the terrible consequences for the Palestinian people today, and how a Jewish state would lead to a global rise in anti-Semitism. This is a key insight into the future that Lord Montagu wrote about so presciently a long time ago. So over to you, sir.
Yes, well, this is the third part of a series that I've been working on during the last 6 months since this terrible, well, you can't call it a war, but this terrible slaughter began. And the third part, the first part is entitled Zionism, the 10 Great Disturbances. The second part was Gaza and the Power of Narratives. And this part is Lord Montagu's warning.
Okay.
So if I may read it, I'll just...
Please. Yeah, thank you.
Section by section, yeah. Lord Montagu's warning. Zionism in search of a protector. From its inception in the late 19th century, Zionism was in search of a powerful protector under whose wing it could establish the Jewish state in Palestine. The Zionist first port of call was the Ottoman Sultan, Abdul Hamid II, who gave them short shrift when they offered to purchase the territory. There followed visits to the great powers, Germany, Russia, and France, but to no avail. It was the outbreak of the war in 1914 that gave them their opportunity, and it was the British government that would become the protector and enabler for the realization of their project. Section 2, the Jewish cousins. Sir Herbert Samuel and Lord Edwin Montagu were Jewish cousins who both served in the British government during the First World War. One was a Zionist and the other an anti-Zionist. Sir Herbert Samuel played a leading role in the formulation of the Balfour Declaration, which placed Great Britain firmly behind the establishment of the Zionist state in Palestine. Lord Montagu vehemently opposed the declaration. And now we come to Lord Montagu's memorandum.
Yeah.
Lord Montagu's memorandum is a lucid response by an orthodox mainstream Jew who viewed Zionism as a dangerous political creed. And it's very important to put this across because at that time, Zionism was a very small cult on the edge of Judaism. And the mainstream had no time for it. So
Yeah.
this was the environment in which this memorandum came out.
And this is the beginning of the 20th century, is that right?
This is 1917.
1917.
This is the year the Balfour Declaration was produced.
Okay.
And all this is happening around the Balfour Declaration.
Right.
Now, this is his kind of reason for being opposed to this whole concept of Zionism.
He was a member of the cabinet in the British government in 1917. The only Jewish member of the cabinet.
The only Jewish member of the cabinet.
Yeah, and he was the only one who dissented. Actually, it's curious, as a Jew, dissented from the Zionist project.
Actually, there were 2 or 3 dissenters. One of the other dissenters was Lord Curzon, who came out very strongly against it.
Okay.
Anyway, let's go to what he said. Yeah. He believed in a fundamental doctrine of traditional Judaism, namely that the Jews could only return to Jerusalem with the coming of the Messiah. He states with dry humor, "I have never heard it suggested, even by their most fervent admirers, that either Mr. Balfour or Lord Rothschild would prove to be the Messiah."
Indeed.
Lord Montagu asserted that there is not a Jewish nation. It is no more true to say that a Jewish Englishman and a Jewish Moor are of the same nation than it is to say that a Christian Englishman and a Christian Frenchman are of the same nation. He followed the orthodox doctrine that Jews are defined by Judaism. "What binds the Jews," he quoted, "the fact that they profess to a greater or less degree the same religion." And this is what defines the Jew throughout history.
Yes, I mean that kind of makes sense because the Jews had a covenant with God, beginning with Mount Sinai with Moses. You know, they were supposed to obey the commandments of God, the 613 commandments of the law given, as I say, to Moses. It was never a case of just being like, well, my DNA is inverted commas Jewish, you know, an ethnic nationalist or an ethnic identity. It was meant to be a religious commitment to obedience to God, to faithfulness to the covenant, to obeying God's law, obeying the Torah. It's what, you know, is what made this group of people unique in their identity, their covenant with God. But today it's become more of an ethnic marker, hasn't it? So I identify.
Well, this was the great modern 19th century change of the idea of race. Which we introduced, the idea of nationalism, which we introduced. Yes. And both of these things are beautifully enunciated by Rabbi Jacob Shapiro, one of the great really advocates for the traditional Jew today. And he is one of the because, you know, what is amazing about the place of the Orthodox Jew is that this is orthodoxy.
Yes.
The Zionists did a brilliant thing by renaming the Orthodox Jew ultra-Orthodox. In other words, our loony fringe, you know.
They're never called extremists, are they? It's always ultra-Orthodox. It's like you get so-called Muslim extremists. I've never seen an ultra-Muslim. It's always extremist Muslim. So you get this selective use of language depending on which religion it is.
Yes, but this is very important because this is where there's a huge gulf between the traditional Orthodox Jew and the Zionist. So let's continue on. He challenged the Zionist claim to Palestine. And then he says this: "I deny that Palestine is today associated with the Jews. It is quite true that Palestine plays a large part in Jewish history, but so it does in modern Mohammedan history. And after the time of the Jews, surely it plays a larger part than any other country in Christian history." He's obviously playing, he's aware of the fact that he's in a Christian environment. But this is really important because he's basically showing that all the three religions have this association, this deep association with Palestine. And what is interesting in terms of history, it is only under the Muslims that both the Christians and the Jews could exist peacefully.
Yes.
and were protected. When the Christians took over the Holy Land of the Crusades, they expelled the Jews, and they expelled the Muslims from Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And now the Jews are doing the same.
Yes.
So it's a very interesting thing to ponder that.
Yes.
He could see quite clearly, and this is really important, he could see quite clearly the ethnic cleansing that would take place if the Zionist project was allowed to go ahead, and found it incredible that his government should give it the green light. And he says, it seems to be inconceivable that Zionism should be officially recognized by the British government. It's completely extraordinary for him. And that Mr. Balfour should be authorized to say that Palestine was to be reconstituted as the national home of the Jewish people. I do not know what this involves, but I assume that it means that Mohammedans and Christians are to make way for the Jews. When the Jews are told that Palestine is their national home, you will find a population in Palestine driving out its present inhabitants, taking all the best in the country.
This is remarkable. And for people who don't realize, I do recommend this book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, by Pape, who is a Jewish historian. He's a very brave Israeli historian. I think he's now living in Britain. And this documents from original archival sources, primary sources, and I just want to read just what it says on the back here. It's very relevant to what you're saying, Ahmed. In 1948, the 1948 Israeli War of Independence involved one of the largest forced migrations in modern history. Around 1 million people were expelled from their homes at gunpoint. Civilians were massacred and hundreds of Palestinian villages destroyed. Denied for almost 6 decades, were denied in the West, I should say. It's obviously known about in the Arab world and beyond. Had it happened today, it could only have been called ethnic cleansing. In this groundbreaking book, renowned Israeli historian Ilan Pape offers impressive archival evidence. This is from Israeli archival sources themselves to demonstrate that from its very inception, and this is what you've just been saying, or what Lord Montagu has been saying, from its very inception, a central plank in Israel's founding ideology was the forcible removal of the indigenous population, a strategy that continues to the present day, obviously very much so. We're seeing it now. Dr. Pape's vivid and timely account sheds new light on the origins and development of the Palestine-Israel conflict and is indispensable for anyone interested in the Middle East. And I do agree with that sentiment. There's some shocking photographs in it as well. It's pretty indisputable, actually.
It's an incredible book, and he's actually at Exeter University and doing wonderful work there.
Yeah.
So we now go on to what actually exercised him most.
Yes.
But what exercised Lord Montagu most was that he perceived to be the anti-Semitic consequences of the establishment of the Zionist state.
Mm-hmm.
This was clearly stated in his opening paragraph, and he was really leaving no doubt in terms of the British government. He wanted it to be on record. He said, "I wish to place on record my view that the policy of His Majesty's government is anti-Semitic, and in result will prove a rallying ground for anti-Semites in every country in the world."
This is remarkable and very controversial and paradoxical. I mean, there's so many facets to this statement that basically Zionism has provoked and incited and encouraged and caused in a very direct way anti-Semitism itself, the very thing that its defenders think is a protector or a safe space.
This is the tragedy. This is the great tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
This is the great tragedy. But the other great tragedy is that, as I say in my piece, the British government did not heed Lord Montagu's warning.
Clearly.
They didn't listen to him. They listened to his cousin.
Well, they're not listening still today. They're not listening to their own legal advisors, who we're told by the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee recently in a semi-clandestine talk she gave, where she said the government's own legal advisors, own lawyers, had told them that Israel is committing war crimes. Therefore, of course, the government must stop supplying weapons to the Israeli state. But of course, the government has ignored that and refuses to make public what this clandestine recording demonstrates, to make public what their own legal advisors are. Why they're not making it public? Because it would mean they would have to stop arming a government committing genocide. And so, yeah, it's still not heeding the warnings today of their own legal advisors, and the terrible consequences are playing out year after year after year.
Well, it's an epic tragedy that we're dealing with at the moment. It's an epic tragedy. Anyway, we go on.
Yes.
The settler Zionist state. After the First World War, with the fall of the Ottomans, the British government was mandated by the newly formed League of Nations to oversee Palestine. The Balfour Declaration was incorporated into the mandate, and Sir Herbert Samuel became the first High Commissioner. So we sent Sir Herbert Samuel, the Zionist, to be the first High Commissioner. Lord Montagu's worst fears began to be realized. The ethnic cleansing of the indigenous people began, and after more than 100 years is still taking place.
It's still taking place in the West Bank, also, of course.
They haven't got rid of they haven't got rid of the indigenous people. Every settler colony has to get rid of its indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
It has to replace them, as Lord Montagu said. You have to replace the people who are there, and it hasn't happened. This is the problem. So we go on. The Palestinians have suffered the full force of the 3 stages of the establishment of a settler colony. And I think this is really important, this part. Yeah. Firstly, their conquest by a colony supported and armed by the British, Americans, and many Western nations. In other words, they weren't dealing with just the colony. They were dealing with one which had this huge external support. After World War II, then the legalization of the colony as a state. This is critical because it comes in as a foreign body, it conquers, and then it has to be legalized. So after World War II, the Americans forced through the newly formed United Nations the partition of Palestine, gifting the greater part of Palestine to the new state of Israel. Yeah. In other words, they were given the lion's share and the best part. And finally, the third stage, when the Palestinians who resisted this manifest injustice were designated terrorists in their own land. And this is the key thing that takes place. Every settler colony goes through exactly the same 3 stages.
Wow.
Wherever you look, Australia, America, anywhere you look, it's exactly the 3 stages. And then they end up by being exterminated because they're savages. It's unbelievable. It's the 7th of October.
Well, so back up to now we're moving fast forward to the contemporary.
Now we're seeing the consequences, and I'm going to deal with the British government because this is critical.
Yeah.
What happened on the 7th of October was preceded by 17 years of persecution meted out to the Gazans by the IDF. 4 times they had mown the grass. And as you know, the term mowing the grass is an Israeli term for going into Gaza and literally carpet bombing it for a period of time, destroying a great deal, killing a lot of people, and then basically keeping them down. So they then have to recover from that. So 4 times they had mown the grass, killing thousands and maiming many more thousands, mostly women and children. Peaceful demonstrations were met with sniper fire, killing and maiming many hundreds. And they used to also go for the knees. This is incredible. Meanwhile, Israeli settlers were illegally occupying the West Bank and East Jerusalem, with Palestinians being ethnically cleansed and many being murdered by the soldiers supporting the settlers. And the West did nothing. No reaction, no outrage at the crimes against humanity being committed in plain view. Silence. The British government in denial. When on the 7th of October, Hamas launched its raid, killing a number of Israeli soldiers, massacring several hundred civilians, and taking hostages back into Gaza, Israel was traumatized. Its ironclad security had been breached. Humiliation and revenge produced an immediate response. The world must know that this was the greatest crime committed against the Jews since the Holocaust. It came out of a blue sky and was an act of pure savagery. Then came the stories. 40 babies beheaded, mass rapes of women and children, 10 children tied together, tortured, burned, and executed, women having their babies torn out of their bellies and stabbed to death, babies placed in ovens. The British Prime Minister and leader of the loyal opposition, closely followed by the Archbishop of Canterbury, joined the procession of world leaders arriving in Tel Aviv to commiserate with the Israeli government and its people and pledge their undying support. The mantra began, Israel must be allowed to defend itself. The bell was rung for the final settler colonial act to begin, the final ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Gazans. The stories that came out of the lurid imaginations of the Israeli PR machine should have been sufficient to warn the British government to act cautiously. But it received and propagated whatever the Israelis fed them. Israel was an ally and friend. The Palestinians continued to be whatever the Israelis said they were. As I write, it is day 173 of the annihilation of Gaza. We are witnessing the complete eradication of a world. This is what genocide looks like. All the world is witnessing the total destruction of a people, their history, and their entire environment. There is no hiding from the truth. The leaders of Israel are announcing publicly exactly what they are doing.
And this is one of the shocking things, because it's not hidden anymore. There have been various cabinet ministers saying, but what by any civilized standards are absolutely outrageous statements, advocating genocide, killings, and refusing to even say that children are protected from targeting. And it's been very blatant in quite shocking ways. And this is because it's been broadcast around social media as well. They think that what they're saying is somehow justifiable because the world looks aghast at this appalling behavior. And they draw obvious parallels with another regime in Europe in the 1930s who also was very blatant about what they were doing, or perhaps less so actually, but the Israelis perhaps more blatant. But these are parallels. But to draw these parallels, of course, invites accusations of anti-Semitism as well. One's not allowed to do that, and it's an arrestable offence in Britain. People have been arrested on demonstrations for saying this, actually, for drawing this parallel historically. Yet the parallels are very obvious, I think.
It's just beyond belief. It's beyond belief what we're witnessing. Nothing like it. I mean, every single people who are involved in the problems of refugees, who are involved in the humanities and all the rest of it, they've never seen anything like this.
Yeah.
Anyway, we go on.
Yeah.
Successive British governments since the Balfour Declaration have been joined at the hip with Israel and been complicit in the process required to establish a settler colony. One would have expected there to be an awakening to the reality of what is now happening. But both our government and the opposition are embedded in the Israeli narrative and in a state of denial regarding what is actually taking place. This has led to two disgraceful episodes. South Africa brought to the International Court of Justice the accusation of genocide against Israel. The court carefully examined the case and decided it had merit, and Israel is now being investigated. The day after the court's announcement, when all attention should have been on this momentous event, the Israeli PR machine lobbed into the arena an accusation against UNRWA that a dozen of its operatives were engaged with Hamas on the 7th of October. Following the Americans, the British government swallowed the bait and cancelled its funding to the UN body responsible for delivering and distributing aid to Gaza, thus further endangering the lives of the Gazans. And I think this is incredible because that accusation of genocide, which is the worst thing that you can be accused of, which has been taken seriously by the highest court, which then put out the orders to, that this must not happen. The British government does an act which is going to lead to further suffering and further destruction of the Gazans, because by destroying UNRWA, they've destroyed the whole of the structure of the network of distribution of the support.
And I noticed I noticed at that time how the British press responded to this extraordinary South African appeal to the International Court of Justice and the accusation of genocide. And I looked in vain in the leading British newspapers like the Times and the Telegraph. You really had to dig deep, deep down, way back in the pages to find a small little reference to it. It wasn't front page news at all. It wasn't really mega event.
No,
it's extraordinary how it was downplayed and marginalized in most of the British press.
Well, even today, if you look at the front pages of the newspapers today, when we are faced with this huge crisis of suddenly the killing of the aid workers has become an issue because Europeans have been killed.
Exactly.
And this is a huge issue. There's only two newspapers of our papers which has got it on the front page this morning: The Guardian and The Independent.
Really?
None of the others have anything to do with it. The whole of the the Times, Telegraph, nothing. It's incredible. When this is an absolutely culminating event.
Yeah, I mean it is that, but it is actually the Israeli slaughter of aid workers. It is actually a story of Western racism. It's something that Peter O'Bourne highlighted in a brilliant article yesterday in the Middle East Eye. It is the incredible prominence these particular victims of Israeli slaughter, Western from World Central Kitchen, that is US-based aid group. Of course, these are mostly white people, and I don't mean to be crass about this, but it really is the point, because the Western, like the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and so on, we knew who they were and their names and their when they were married and how old they are and their families. Suddenly we care, but if it's Palestinians or worse than that, Muslims, then they're just a faceless mass, and we don't know who they are. We don't really care who they are. Yes, they can be slaughtered. I mean, this is not exaggerating. This is really what happens. So there is a great racism here. When it's our kind, inverted commas, then we're really interested. But when it's others, We're not. That they're almost subhuman. I mean, it's hard to believe the West, because it's so committed, ostensibly, in theory, to non-racist outlook, non-racist attitude, but nevertheless, in practice, it's there, and it's very blatant and
it's very troubling.
It's very, very troubling. It's quite shocking. I really didn't expect to see this in my naivety, how naive I was, to see this still happening now. But it's clearly all this talk of not being non-racist and treating everyone equally under the law and not discriminating in the West is complete baloney when it comes to foreign policy.
Yeah. Anyway, the second disgraceful episode is the attempt to demonize the marches calling for a ceasefire. While the genocide continues and the suffering of the Gazans increases, and the British government continues to arm Israel, the government, along with the opposition, turns its focus on introducing legislation to criminalize those peacefully demonstrating against the carnage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible.
I know. It is. The Home Secretary, she recently resigned, saying these were hate marches. I went on one of the first big ones, and it was full of families and young people who are clearly passionately concerned and sympathizing with the plight of the Gazans. There was no hate. It was a sense of great shock and upset and outrage that these people were being slaughtered. That was the motive for all of us. And to say that was hateful was a terrible slander and a lie against the British people who did care, actually.
And they came from everywhere. It wasn't just the Muslims. It was of course a large contingent now of young Jews. Who are outraged by what is happening.
Indeed.
We now come to the last segment, which is anti-Semitism. Lord Montagu recognized the problem that anti-Semitism posed, but he believed that far from solving the problem, the creation of a Zionist state in Palestine would lead to a rallying ground for anti-Semites in every country in the world. What he said. He argued that if the Jews had their own state, the pressure for them to leave countries in which they were already unpopular and would now be viewed as foreigners would become overwhelming. However, he could not have imagined the Holocaust and its impact on the establishment of the Zionist state. Anti-Semitism was outlawed in every Western country, and blind support given to the Zionist state as a safe haven for the Jews, who would now come under the absolute protection of the West. And this is the problem. This is fundamentally the problem, because the Palestinians have had to disappear. They don't exist in the Western narrative. That's the great problem.
Yeah.
And then I go on to say, Lord Montagu knew little about Arab Jewry, which did not share the Western narrative of persecution. A great tragedy unfolded as Zionism exported the curse of anti-Semitism to the Arab world, separating the Jews from their Arab cultures and driving them into the Jewish state. So what he was concerned about happened in the Arab world. That took place because the curse of nationalism meant that, you got the Jews became a sort of, a dangerous minority in an Arab country, suspect. That's how they would view them, as a national, in the relationship that then developed with the Zionist state. And this, by the way, is beautifully documented by that wonderful Oxford scholar, his family originated from Iraq. They were Iraqi Jews, and again, I'm sure you know the book. He's very, very well known. He's been on YouTube a great deal, but he wrote a fantastic book about the whole question of of the problem for the Arab Jew and how they had to lose their cultures when they entered and became second-class citizens within Israel. Because again, Israel is a European nation. It was created by white European Jews.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at photographs, which you still see online, of Arabs, i.e. Jews, Christians, Muslims, beginning the 20th century and before, ethnically they look pretty indistinguishable. But today's Jews often look as if they're Caucasians from America, because they often are Caucasians from America or from Russia or from Poland or wherever. So they don't even look Arab, because of course what they were originally, in the sense Arab being a person who speaks Arabic. I mean, I don't mean that they are a particular ethnic group. That someone's native language is Arabic, is what an Arab is, and so there's been an ethnic replacement, clearly, an ethnic cleansing.
Huge change. Anyway, now we get on to the final thing.
Yeah.
Lord Montagu would not have been surprised at the growth of Israel into a racist apartheid state, harboring a fanatical religious sect bent on genocide in order to prepare the way for the coming of the Messiah. This would not have surprised him. It's in his memorandum. Basically, if you look at it carefully, you'll see that he sees something aberrational about the idea of a Jewish state. However, I believe he would have been astonished at the continuing complicity of the British government. The fact that we have not been in the West been able to see the transformation, the metamorphosis of Israel into the state that it now is. And that's where I think he would have been surprised. The epic tragedy is now playing out. Israel has proclaimed to the world that to be anti-Israel is to be anti-Semitic. They have attempted to gather all Jews into their project. The world is horrified by the unfolding of one of the great crimes of history. Israel is now isolated, and Jews everywhere are suffering an exponential rise in anti-Semitism.
Powerful. And this, as we've said, as you said, is the great irony that Zionism itself is actually causing anti-Semitism. It's a self-defeating project, a great tragedy, a great irony of history, and it's still playing out now.
Yeah, it's playing out now, and the great tragedy is that it came out of a real persecution that existed in the West. It is completely a Western project.
But in the Christian West, and this
in
is
the
the
Christian West, and then in the the post-Christian West, if you like to call it. I mean, but certainly in the Christian West, it was something. It was an idea that was born during the 19th century, where you had nationalism, which again has produced some horrible manifestations. When you think of the nationalist, the fascism, which is a nationalist project, is horrifying. And racism, the business where we started defining everybody as races. Well, quite clearly, you can't call an Eritrean Jew and a German Jew the same race. And yet, that is what they were defined as, a race. And of course, this is where Lord Montagu says this is ridiculous. They're not a nation. They're not a race. Then you can't bunch them together like that. So the huge crisis took place within Europe. And we are so deeply responsible for what happened. But the outcome, and this is on a sort of mega scale. This is a drama of epic proportions, and it's something that goes beyond my being able to even begin to understand the profundity of it. But it's ended up with the Muslims becoming the they are now in the situation where they are being blamed.
Mm.
So in our country, we've got a situation where there's a huge rise in anti-Semitism, and that rise in anti-Semitism is definitely down to the Zionist state, because whenever the Zionists go for the Palestinians in their so-called wars, which are not wars, I mean, these are just slaughters.
Yeah.
When they go to anti-Semitism all over the world rises.
Mm.
But the Muslims are then, Islamophobia also rises.
Well, the problem with the language is anti-Semitism, because it's now conflated with anti-Zionism or anti-Israeli government views, because those two are now the same, and actually officially defined like that in Britain and Germany and so on. It devalues the coinage of anti-Semitism, the language of anti-Semitism, because what is this really Jew hatred, or is this criticism of the Prime Minister of Israel? Well, it's all the same thing, isn't it, really? Well, no, it's not. It's actually extremely different. So we're talking about a rise in anti-Semitism. What exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about a rise in anti-Israeli sentiment? Well, yeah, absolutely. I'm not denying that there isn't the existence of actual anti-Jewish hatred. I mean, that does exist. But I do think that's a tiny proportion, I suspect, of the overall anti-Zionist sentiment, which, as I say, is defined as anti-Semitism, robbing the whole discourse of any kind of legitimacy. You can't oppose Israel at all. Otherwise, you're the worst evil person imaginable. And this is, again, robbing the legitimacy of political opposition to crimes. And that's terrible, I think.
But you mentioned this right at the very beginning, but this last 6 months has also utterly stunned myself as well. I never expected to experience in this country the kind of response that we've seen. Never. No. Because the reality is so blatant and so clear for everyone to see, and yet the complete denial of it in this country is something which I find very difficult. So what my 3 pieces, which I hope will, obviously, when there's something like this, like with yourself, I mean, I think you'll share this with me, that you have to do something. You have to make some contribution to try to create some clarity about something. So what I've tried to do in these 3 pieces is to basically shine a clarity on it, a normality on it, to see it from a normal perspective, from what I would call a mizan perspective, in other words, a perspective of balance, of justice, the Islamic perspective.
Yeah.
And I'm calling this group of pieces that I produced Gazan Awakening, because I believe that this has been an extraordinary awakening.
Yeah, for many millions globally, indeed.
Yeah, and one has to go back to this Vietnam War when there was the teach-in, when suddenly, I think it was at Michigan State University or where it happened. But anyway, it was a group of scholars got together, and students came, and they just went on and on talking about Vietnam, and it became a continuous process where they started in the afternoon, it went on through the night. And a huge number of students arrived because they didn't know anything about Vietnam. They were going out there killing Vietnamese. They didn't know, most Americans didn't even know where Vietnam was. And so they went through a huge process of learning. And I believe that's what's now happening in terms of Palestine. Because what you're finding is that those voices which you never heard, the voices of the Orthodox Jews like Jakub Shapiro, the wonderful people like this book, another wonderful book, which is A General's Son, that amazing book, Miko Pele. What you're finding is that those Jews who were brought up in Israel, that went through the whole indoctrination, but who came through it and saw through it, and who have paid a terrible price for their honesty and for their courage, have shown what it is. The Orthodox Jew, you never heard of them before. You never heard their voice. You didn't know that was the mainstream voice of Judaism.
Yeah.
That's why they're saying, Zionism is not Judaism. And then you've got the young Jews who are growing up, and the attempt to indoctrinate them is failing, because they're seeing that what is actually happening, this militaristic state, has nothing to do with the beauty of Judaism. Judaism is a religion which is centered upon the worship of Almighty God.
And obedience of his commands, and it's to do with faith. Do with faith in God, living justly, walking mercifully, treating your neighbor well. These are religious commands. They're completely absent from the discourse I hear from Israel today, and yet they should be part of that discourse if they claim to have any continuity with the historic biblical people of Israel.
So I think what we can say is that this awakening that is happening, inshallah, will lead to some real solutions, or some real thing, because if it continues on the way that it's going, it can only be horror, because all Israel is, from the Palestine Arab perspective, is a settler colonial state. That is all it is. From the Western perspective, it's the Holocaust. It's the whole business of Zionism. It's lots of different things put together, but in reality, that is all it is. It's people coming and claiming land which belongs to other people, and attempting to take it over, and that's all it is. And whereas with the Americas, it happened a long time ago. And the Indians, the what we used to call, when I was a child, Red Indians, the Native Americans, are in reservations, or have been, were slaughtered.
Same in Australia as well.
Same in Australia, but in many parts of Africa, this happened, but it wasn't successful. In South Africa, it wasn't successful. In Rhodesia, it wasn't successful. It became Zimbabwe, and so on and so forth. But in Palestine, it's still going on.
And we can see it on TikTok, on Twitter, on YouTube, on
everything.
It's no
longer... as Muslims, we have what I don't think they realize is that there's a huge compassion within the Muslim heart, and the way when we see the way the Gazans are behaving, it's incredible. The beauty of these people is amazing, and they had incredible forgiveness, the Palestinians, because the Palestinians were prepared to accept a slither of what was their land, the West Bank. You're just a little part of their land. They were prepared to accept that and to be at peace, but they were even not denied that. They were even denied that. Even that had to become a part of the state of Israel. So this is where the huge problem of Israel is Zionism. That is the problem, and Zionism is now being, for the first time, really looked at and examined. And that is the great hope, that people actually see through Zionism, because Zionism is a horrible ideology which has led to the most phenomenal suffering in the world. And the Jews who are mainstream Orthodox Jews, they reject it completely, and their voice is now being heard.
Yeah. Okay. Powerful stuff. Troubling times indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Ahmed Paul Keeler, for it's an amazing article. I'll link to it in the description below. Very well written, very concise, illuminating, and helping us to remember the little known story of Lord Montagu and his memorandum, which really should be in a forefront of our minds in Europe and Britain when it comes to thinking about what we're doing in Palestine at the moment. Very important, prophetic, and I agree that he would have been dismayed at the current government's response to, and the opposition, the loyal opposition, as you
Loyal opposition.
loyal to the government rather than loyal to justice. They're just slightly beginning to wake up now in the last 24 hours, demanding the government release or make public the government's own legal advice about whether or not Israel has broken the law, humanitarian law. But of course it has. It's an open secret, but the government's refusing to publish it. But now the opposition is finally getting around to actually calling on the government to publish it. They've been very conformist and supine so far. So I sense there's a change in the wind, but how far will it result in any fundamental change? Time will tell. Hopefully, it will. But I think we're seeing a paradigm shift finally. But I could be wrong. Anyway, well, time will tell, inshallah. So thank you so much indeed, Ahmed Paul Keeler, for your time, your expertise.
Thank you.
Insights, as always, into contemporary. I will just lastly mention this book, which is a marvelous must-read, Rethinking Islam and the West, A New Narrative for the Age of Crises. Actually, it's a really, really good book. I do recommend you get a copy. Very insightful indeed. I won't go into that now, but if you can Google it, get hold of it, you won't regret it, I promise. So thank you very much. Until next time.
Assalamu alaikum.